welcome, Barrie. When we were talking earlier this evening, and I found out that you spent some time in Sydney, and that's my hometown, Sydney, although I do love Melbourne. And I wanted to ask you, and we'd heard earlier on, I think it was from Sophia, about nighttime and different cities, and you've spent time both in Sydney and Melbourne, and I always think that Sydney's great at the day and Melbourne's great at night, but I just wonder how the night changes your perception of which city, you get the most buzz out of, or what the difference in this. It's something that's always in my mind, is this, that Sydney and Melbourne are so close together and yet so different vibes.
Yeah. And particularly at night. I mean, I'm a bad person to ask about night at this stage when I'm 38 in my life, but 10 years ago I probably would have been across the Yarra with whatever's going on over there.
Oh, that's not the Yarra, that's a guy in the bushes. Strange.
But, the Sydney-Melbourne debate, I think is, it's obviously a topic of fascination for most people who live here, but Sydney is just bacchanalian and outwardly motivated, and people really make no bones about having a big night on any night of the week. It used to be my favourite thing when I sort of crossed over into being a serious professional, to drive down Oxford Street on a Friday morning or a Monday morning, and there's all these sort of reprobates hanging out of the clubs still at that time, and I felt like Jesus Christ arriving at work. But Melbourne seems to do things on a much more kind of subterranean level. It's always sort of compressed and down in a hole, and only 15 people are allowed to attend and all of that sort of stuff. So I think the difference is one's outwardly motivated and showy, and Melburnians take themselves very seriously, and it's very inwardly motivated at night.
I think that's a good analysis, Yeah, and so with your work, when I looked at what you do all sorts of things, and one of them is make cities better cities.
We try.
So how does the nighttime, how do you make a night space work as in contrast to a day space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think cities, it's almost better to judge them at night than at the day. My personal opinion is that cities are remarkable when they are liberal and daring and tolerant. Those are the characteristics which I like in any kind of big city. And during the day, I think most cities are kind of similar. I mean, maybe bar a bit of difference in natural terrain, like Sydney versus Melbourne, but at night, that's when things come into play, like liquor licensing legislation, and it's quite embarrassing, I think, being Australian and knowing how severely and intensely we're moderated. I mean, the blog that Penny brought up is a perfect example of that. I think Melbourne's kind of cultural landscape got set back a few years ago with the change of liquor licensing laws, and that's a negative view of it. The positive side was when Melbourne let things go a little bit at night, when they didn't try and clamp down. It was a fantastically explosive and interesting time in Melbourne, and so I think it's really challenging. Great cities at night have the confidence to just let their citizens go a little bit, to just go a little bit wild, because I think that's our inclination at night, is to just blow off a little bit of steam. There are very few people who would tell you, I'm a loon during the day, but at night I'm a really serious and boring person. It always kind of goes the other way around.
So why do you think that is? What is it about the night that means people burn off steam?
Good question. With most of the work we do, we're trying to satisfy a human need. And when we're coming up with concepts, we generally take it back right to basics and think about what do we as human beings want and respond to. And part of that process is quite often thinking about how we were in much more primitive times, to try and understand, as highly evolved but nonetheless animals, what are our basic things that we want. And I was thinking a little bit about that within the context of this presentation, and thinking about when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were foraging, what were our nights like? And before we could command fire, they must have been absolutely terrifying. We would have huddled in caves, not knowing what was going on outside and expecting the worst. And then when we managed to control fire, the game really changed, because we had this tool that shed some light, literally, on what was around us. And it warmed us, and we gathered in numbers around it, and it also allowed us to cook food, which is a social experience, obviously. And then all of a sudden the night was very different. Fire really changed things for us, and it became a place that was, by definition, about socializing and sharing, and that's really exciting.
Yeah. Although the socialising and sharing could still have happened during the day. Do you think it was the social, or was it just the fact that there was light? For example, it's quite interesting that all the great apes are diurnal animals. They live during the daytime because their vision is their best sense.
Yeah. Well,
so suddenly there was a quote, I think by somebody called, no, it was Emerson said something about imagine a world with one night every 1,000 years, and what would it be like? And somebody else said, well, we'd go mad. But so it is that sense of the night falls, and yet then there's the darkness, and what would we have done?
Absolutely, and we're different people at night to during the day. And I think, to go back to what Bill Henson was saying, it's a more visceral time. We have to use different senses. We interpret a lot. On a subconscious level, we're constantly making assumptions about what's going on at night, whereas during the day we see it in the cold, hard light of day, and that's not as rewarding. I worry that the mystery in our life is diminishing, that we can find out about everything we want to know about so quickly. Even going out tonight, as an example, thinking of when Penny and Chris and I started 3000 a while back, it was a lottery. You would go out on the street, and through talking to people and a little bit of kind of insider knowledge, you might find out what was going on. Now, with what's in our phone, everything that we need to know is at our disposal, and I'm not convinced that the world's really richer for that. I think that we've compressed out spontaneity, and it's a saddening state of affairs.
I think it's how we use that information, though. I don't think of available information as being a compressing a thing. I mean, it's sort of a bit like, well, when the printing press came out, right, there were suddenly books, and so information was suddenly available to the masses on a scale that had not been possible before. And I think that was an enriching experience for humankind. I mean, obviously it was, otherwise we couldn't have had all the things. And I sort of think of this new data generation in that same vein. I'm not convinced that it's all doom and gloom about the amount, I think there is still spontaneity. I think we can still look at the stars and wonder what it's like.
Well, I loved when you said that so much. I find it really quite bemusing that I'm speaking to a mathematician, because, as my mum will attest, my mathematics history is checkered. I don't think I made it past year 10. And but you were talking about maths and understanding the stars, and it just kind of, it wasn't something I thought about before I came down here, but what an incredible experience to look up at the stars. And I know it sounds like such a dumb thing to say, but I have an aversion to green bashing, to people who talk about sustainability all the time. It riles me, because I feel like it should be implied. And I think because I was so annoyed by it, I never really...
Can you explain what do you... So you're annoyed when people talk about sustainability because it should be the norm? Is that what you're saying? So we shouldn't have to talk about it because it should be embedded in everything we do? Is that
well, not everything you do, but I feel like when people are too overt with what it is that they do in their sustainable lives or in their sustainable practice, I feel like it's just a status grab rather than actually trying to affect the cause at heart. A
bit like washing your dirty linen in public sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I did have this moment when I was looking at the stars once where it dawned on me that the light I was seeing was from so many years ago and
it's
so far away.
Yeah.
I had the same response as you, which is to think, holy shit, I'm so small and my life is so short.
Yeah.
And the trouble with unsustainable behavior, it's people who've got short-term motivations making decisions with very long-term consequences. And looking up at the stars, I could understand that it was this thing that I could do to actually contemplate what the enormity of my life and the things that extend beyond it. And so I kind of have the stars to thank for actually being a more sustainable person now.
Oh, wow.
It's a convoluted story.
No, I think it's a lovely story.
Barrie, I'm sorry to cut in briefly, but I'm interested, you talked about a call for cities to be more daring and more spontaneous. How can they do that in spheres that are less about the social and less about the public and more about that more about the solitary experience for the person in the city?
I'm not sure if there's a call for that. I mean, I do feel that there's a real need for people to get better at being alone. That again, and I'm not anti-technology at all. I'm just suspicious that a lot of the things that happen, particularly online, are not universally good. And I don't see us creating enough time to form our own opinions, to have our own thoughts. And it's interesting seeing mindfulness really kind of shooting into prominence as something which is happening at school level and in businesses and large organizations, and that makes me feel kind of positive, because I think the note is it's good to be alone with your own thoughts for some time and to be solitary, but maybe what you're talking to is something kind of larger and sorry.
No, I'm just really interested. Something like the thousands and 3,000 is in part creating a community around a city that allows a city to be better, improve itself by building community around it.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in your own practice, in your own work, where you go next.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think at its core, the thousands is about understanding and improving life in cities, and the way that we've chosen to do that is to build a tribe and to try and usher people towards situations and experiences that we feel are better for them. But I guess if we were to expand what we were to do, and view ourselves more as a tool for living better in a city, that in some way kind of teaching people to be where to find space to be by themselves, how to be alone, which is such a difficult thing to do. I broke up with a girlfriend of a long time, and it took me about 1.5 years to be okay with actually being alone. And I remember sitting by the coffee machine at the city wine shop having meatballs and I was drinking a Malbec. That's how real that memory, when I hit that moment where I thought I can be alone and I'm actually really happy being alone. And night's a pretty good time for practicing it. So there are these new things that we need to learn to be able to deal with the fact that our cities are busier and more dense and more chaotic. I just don't really see that the thousands could really be the vehicle for that for us. I think it would have to be a new kind of publication or product. Yeah.
Could I ask a more clarification about the projects? Because I'm unfamiliar with the thousands. And
it's just a very simple city guide that...
oh, no, this is what Penny was talking... Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay,
It's the simplest website, most appallingly built website in some respects. It's so clunky, but in 200 words, someone like Penny will write about what it is that they think that you should go to and why it's a good idea. And what's kind of great about that is if you can support a decent enterprise, it's not only better for the reader who goes along, but it's better for the person who runs the enterprise, and that should beget better enterprises generally. So the plan is to create this kind of ever-increasing sort of motion of civic improvement. By supporting good things, it begets good things.
Yeah, I was just sort of picking up on your idea about, being alone and being at night. I'm not really sure how you would go about designing a city so that everybody could be alone and at night. I mean, not that they would want to be either, but...
I do like the idea of an article which is about places you could be for some kind of perspective. I mean, we're generally in cities on the outside looking in, and that's very different to the other way around. So, for example, the Northcote Hill that sort of comes down, if you sit on the steps to the side of the road just off the traffic, it's the most... amazing view, or what Penny was describing about with the Dandenongs. I mean, we have such a narrow audience. There are 15,000 kids who all live in Fitzroy that read our publications, and not too much beyond that. So, we can really challenge them. What is this Dandenong? What is a Dandenong?
On the note of what is a Dandenong, please thank Sally Wood.
The gong and the nong. Thank you.